Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Thoughts of the Young Icon with me, Sam. Today, I want to continue in this special series that I'm doing about the 5 important lessons I learned from some of the most important people in my life. Today, I'm going to share the 5 important lessons I learned from my mother, a very humble woman, a very loving woman, a very meek woman, a woman who is wise beyond anything that I've ever experienced. I hope you enjoy the lessons and I hope they inspire you to become a better person the way they did me. Thank you very much. My mother is someone who's been very dear to me my whole life. As a boy, there's always uh, there's always that special connection that us boys, us men, have with our mothers. And with me, it's no different. My mom is someone who is very special, someone who's very dear to me, and I'm grateful to the Lord that here I am at 32 years old and my mother is still alive. I know that there's a lot of people who lost their mothers along the way, but I'm super grateful every single day that my mom is still here. And there's so many things that my mom has taught me, through her words, through her actions, and just by observing her. And I think she's such an incredible woman that I decided to make this video to share the 5 important lessons I learned from my mother. Now, the first lesson I'd like to share is that my mother taught me of a love that is in deeds and not just saying, I love you. Now, I think saying I love you to people is very, very important. But at the same time, what I learned from my mother was that beyond just the words, beyond just saying those 3 words, I love you need to live a life that shows the person that you love them. My mother's one of those characters who is she's she's just caring. She'll do whatever it takes to make sure that everything is fine, everyone is fine, the home was fine, I was fine, my brother was fine. My mother is a teacher by profession, well, up until she retired. So teachers don't make a lot of money. But my mother would always go above and beyond, to do things for my brother and I, to get us little gifts, to get us little presents, to make sure that we were clothed, to make sure that we were bathed, to make sure that we were well mannered young men when we were growing up. And even now, my mother still, she tells me she loves me by, how she calls me. She tells me she loves me by how, every time I need her for something, she's there for me. I always thank her for. I remember a time when my wife and I we'd left the country for an extended period of time, and my mother, she basically left every one of her programs to come and house sit our house in our absence. I mean, if that's not saying I love you, I don't know what is. There she is making sure. And this is when I was already over 30 years old. My mother will still do things above and beyond even now. And to me, that taught me that love is beyond just saying to someone, I love you, because you can say to someone that you love them, but your actions can be different. And what my mother showed me and what my mother has taught me over the years is that even if you don't say to someone, I love you, in those words, you can say to them, I love you by checking up on them. You can say, I love you by doing something for them, an act that they weren't expecting, or even an act that they were expecting, but doing it in a way that shows that you love them, by preparing a meal, by asking where you are, asking what time you're going to get home, things like that. My mother gave me this lesson that love is beyond the 3 words, that love needs to be expressed in your deeds, in your actions, in how you interact with the people you claim to love. Because you can't claim to love someone and yet all you do is start arguments with them, all you do is fight with them, all you do is things which not what is involved in love, or things that don't represent love. I took inventory of my life and I realized that sometimes I was claiming to love people, but I only did that by saying I love you. My actions were contrary. When I measured them against the actions of my mother and the words of my mother, the advice of my mother, I realized that it's beyond saying you love someone. Even if I say it to other people and I say no, but I love so and so, like for argument's sake, I say I love Rachel. If I say I love Rachel, but I don't care to her needs, if I say I love Rachel and I don't make sure that I provide and protect for her, if I if I omit to do the things that are contained in love, do I really love her? Perhaps not. And so my mother taught me that it's important to love beyond your words. And sometimes the love that you show beyond your words is greater than even just saying, I love you. So that was lesson number one. Lesson number two that I learned from my mother is the power of using few words and the power of silence. My mother is she's not a woman of many words. My mother is someone who, for the most part, well, in her interactions with me at least, she's very calm, and she's a woman of very few words, especially in tough situations. My mother is someone who is a voice of reason in many situations, and a voice of reason, a calm voice. And I've seen situations whereby, things didn't go well. And, my mom would simply say something like, it will be okay. And those words, it will be okay, were more than enough for me. And sometimes it would just sit there and would be silent, and she would just hold my hand, or she'd just give me a look and she wouldn't say anything. And I learned that there is power in silence, there is power in few words. Sometimes we tend to think that in order to make someone feel better, in order to improve a situation, a lot needs to be said, a lot of clarity needs to be given. But sometimes that's not the case. In fact, many times, if you analyze a situation, or if you analyze a scenario whereby, let's say, you're trying to be there for your friend, sometimes being there for your friend simply means you are there. Like, you go there, you sit next to them. You don't necessarily have to say much, but just your presence. She taught me that few words and silence means your presence. Don't speak too much, but be present. Be present and make your presence felt even in the silence. So this is one of the most important lessons I learned from my mother. It's actually something that has helped me in business as well. It's helped me in my marriage. It's helped me in so many other avenues. We don't need to always be talking so much. Even in negotiations, sometimes just sit and listen. Just sit in silence and listen. And when addressed, you don't need to speak many flowery words as we like to sometimes do. Just sit, listen, give your short answers, give answers that are well thought, and use silence as a tool to your advantage. That's something which I learned from my mother, which I use even till today, and I'm very, very grateful for that. Important lesson number three that I learned from my mother is the importance of prayer, study of the word, and attending church services. Guys, I talked in an earlier video on how my dad showed me the importance of God being first and foremost, and acknowledging him in everything, acknowledging the grace. But there's also, it's very important to know who God is. My mother, this is something that she made sure that me and my brother and a lot of other youth, a lot of other youngsters got to know very early on. Like, don't assume God. There's a lot of people who assume who God is. They create their idea of God in their own heads because they don't study, because they don't pray, because they don't attend church services where they can learn. I remember when we were young, my brother and I, we never had a choice. Like, My mom, she didn't give us a choice to say you can go to Sunday school or not. It was, hey, it's Sunday. You are going to Sunday school. And if we didn't want, she'd force us, she'd, wake us up. And there's a verse in the Bible. It says, if you train up a child in the way they must go, when they're older, they'll not depart from it. And I've seen that verse become real in my own life, because by my mom's efforts when I was younger, by her teaching us the word, teaching us to study. Her and my dad, they would make us memorize verses. And on Sunday, church wasn't optional. It was, we needed to go. And that's such an important thing that I've learned, because by giving me that foundation, this is something which has then led to me having a stronger relationship with God, having a stronger faith, having a deeper love and appreciation of the things of God. So, an important lesson that I learned from my mother is that, with God, you can never start too early. And with God, it's important that you read your Bible, because then you get to know who God is. It won't be secondhand information. You have firsthand information. And when you pray, again, you're fellowshipping with Him. So you're getting that firsthand interaction with God. And when you attend church services, it's like the preachers, God gives the preachers even deeper revelations of who He is. And then those deeper revelations then come to you, and they lift you up. So it's like the study that you're doing, it can take you up to a certain position, like a certain level. But when someone expounds it even further, it takes you up. So this is something that I learned. And I learned this, and I will use it even with my own children. I think the importance of giving them a foundation in God, encouraging them to memorize verses, encouraging them to study the Bible, attend church services is so important. I remember one of the first verses that I ever memorized, a couple of verses that I memorized in my younger days. My mom and I, we used to do memory verses together. I remember we did Joshua 1:8 together. We did First Corinthians 10, verse 13 together, and a lot of other verses, and I still remember the words, like, First Corinthians 10:13, it talks about how no temptation has seized you except what is common to man, and God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. And when you're tempted, He'll find a way out so that you can stand up over it. And this is something which, I kid you not, I must have memorized when I was 6 years old. That's 28 years ago. But yeah, that's something which it's a lesson which, my mom shared with me. It's a lesson which I have seen from her life, and it's something which has translated into my own life, and is translated into beautiful results in my life. So that's lesson number 3. Lesson number 4 that I learned from my mother is that you can do a lot with a little. I don't know what it is about African women, but man, African women, you give them a little and they will turn it into a lot. Actually, I don't think it's just African women. I think it's just women in general. Women have this magical, special touch, this special grace upon their lives to see what appears to be a little to a man and turn it into something that is a lot. My mother is someone who has been exceptional at doing that. And this is something that I've learned from her, just that perspective of, what we have is enough, and what we have perhaps is even more than we think we have. As men, we have a tendency to overlook at the big picture, or to be so ambitious that sometimes we fail to see what is right here before us. So my mother has taught me how to, sort of shrink up, or sort of bring myself back to earth, to realize that the seemingly little, because many other times in this life we think what we have is little, but it's not actually little, it's seemingly little. We're comparing it with something else. I think there was a lesson I learned with my dad about keeping up with the Joneses. It's something similar with my mom. It's like what she was showing me was that the seemingly little, or the seemingly insignificant thing that I have is actually more than enough. It's more than I need. I remember asking for, more clothes, or when I was going to school, more money. And, my mom, she would sit me down and she would ask me, "Hey, Sam, what is it that you want this money for?" And I would look at my expenses and I'll bring them to her. And then, she would ask me, there'll be some items on the list and she'd ask me, "Do you really need this?" And I'll think about it. And I'm like, "Yeah, I want it, but I don't really need it." And would cut out all the things that I wanted and I didn't need and just get back to the basics of what I needed. And then what I realized is what they were giving me was even more than what I required. And that if I firstly stuck to what I needed and then um, with time added on the other things that I wanted, I had enough for both. I just needed to plan it better. So my mom, she taught me how to plan. She taught me how to have this perspective, this understanding that the seemingly little that we have is actually a lot. And if we use that little wisely, then we can turn it into a lot. My mom's also a business mind. She's one of those people who doesn't really matter the amount of capital that you give her. If you give her millions, she'll create more millions. But if you give her hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, she'll take those and still multiply it because she's got that perspective. And that's something that I've also learned from her, to understand that, look, just because you're not where you want to be or what you envision yourself to be doesn't mean that right now you're insignificant. It's like the little, the seemingly little that you are or you have now is all you need to take you to the next level. So that's a very important lesson that I learned from my mother. So lesson number 5, patience in the face of hardship. Life has its way of, from time to time, shaking you up. Sometimes things go the way you want them to go, in the exact way you envision them to go. But many other times where we face situations whereby things don't go the way we had hoped they would go. And I've seen this in my own mother's life, and I've seen her go through some tough times. I've seen her go through some moments where, things were really unpleasant. And I have seen other people in similar situations become bitter. I've seen other people in similar situations become angry. I've seen other people in similar situations become resentful. But with my mother, no, that's not the way she behaves. That's not the way she reacts. That's just not who she is. My mother is the kind of person, irrespective of external circumstances, she has an internal atmosphere that she controls that is irrespective of external factors. So that's something that I picked up from my mom. That's a lesson which I learned, but I'm also learning because, there are times where I admittedly have found myself in a situation where external factors have bothered me a lot more than they probably should have. And when I look at my mother, I mean, she's like the definition of a strong woman, like a strong person. I don't know. It doesn't even matter if we talk woman, man. She's just a strong person, and that's something which I learned from her. That's something which I'm picking up from her. That's something which I'm picking up in my own life, and I think it's something which every one of us should pick up. We need to create that internal atmosphere of peace and patience, of love, where we're so grounded that irrespective of what's going on around us, irrespective of what's going on in our lives that's perhaps unpleasant, we culture ourselves so much that we're able to have peace within ourselves, that we're able to have an atmosphere of joy, an atmosphere of contentment. You know, the situation can be blatantly terrible, but the way you take it, the way you react is your choice. That's what my mother has taught me, because I've seen her, in some very sad situations. I've seen her, and even in those situations, my mother is one of those people who is going to not just keep up appearances. No, she's not keeping up appearances. She's just strong on the inside. She's mentally, she's emotionally strong. She's someone who, you know, there's this saying, in our country here, we talk of how the same hot water that hardens the egg is the same hot water that softens the potato. So my mother is one of those people who, The water didn't soften her. The water hardened her, but at the same time, she still soft at the core. So it's like an egg whereby it's a boiled egg on the outside, but the yolk is still watery. So it's like she still has a pure heart, but she's got a hard shell. So this is something that I learned from my mother, that never let situations weigh you down, never let situations overwhelm you, but rather you have that hard shell outside, but your core, your inside, you're still content, you're still at peace, you're still happy. My mother is such a remarkable person. And like I said earlier, I'm always grateful for her life, and I'm grateful that she is my mother, and there's so much that I've learned from her. And if I could continue with the list, I could probably go to 1,000. But for today's video, I just wanted to share these five lessons that I learned from my mother. So if you've watched this far, I'd like you to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and don't forget to tell a friend about Thoughts of the Young Icon. Thank you very much.